Those people who are listening to this webcast and those who are gathered here are aware of the fact that on April 29th, there was a dialogue that Mr. LaRouche participated in with various economists from leading institutions in the United States, as well as with representatives of the nations that would be involved in the four-power agreement that Mr. LaRouche has put forward. And this question is one that has been generated out of that discussion from one of the participants there. And the question is this. He says, Lynn, in our continuing work on the four-power agreement, we've done a great deal of work on China and looking at China's economy. And there's something that's come up that we'd like you to address, because on the one hand, China clearly has dedicated itself to building up its internal infrastructure. They are constructing nuclear power plants. They're obviously engaged in various agreements for mass transit systems based on high-speed rails and various other forms of infrastructure that obviously all of us agree with. But at the same time, you're dealing with a country that has a massive population, the very vast majority of which are extremely poor and unskilled. And therefore, as admirable as these efforts are, it seems that what China is currently doing is not nearly enough. In fact, what has come up, and we don't quite know how to address this, and we don't mean to say that China is wrong or right, but we want you to kind of put forward a solution to this, because in fact it seems that China is running what I could only refer to as a hybrid economy, and one that is very dangerous, because they have all of this infrastructure going on the one hand, but then on the other hand, there is no way around the fact that the mass or the majority of their population is largely engaged in producing cheap goods for export to external markets. And the fact is that those markets are shrinking and are shrinking rapidly. This seems to be a huge vulnerability for the Chinese economy. Now, obviously, a four-power agreement would present a solution to that. But our question is really from the standpoint of overall economic planning. Is the government of China right in the way that they are pursuing this, or should they concentrate far more on even greater projects for their own internal benefit?
China is doing, in general, exactly the right thing. The problem is the United States and Western Europe are doing the wrong thing. Now, China, what's the story here? There are several things to be considered. First of all, China's development was initially crippled by British influence, Bertrand Russell's in particular. And China's development was also crippled by what happened with the British East India Company earlier, which laid the basis for this problem. This is a major problem. Now, what did China do? China responded, adapted under instructions from the world to follow a certain policy, and China was also told it would not have access to certain technologies. Also, fact. Now, what's the problem? Well, there's no solution for the problem the way the question is posed. Because if you accept the world market, which China lives in, as it is, you're saying we've got to kill off about 2 billion Chinese. Because they cannot live, they cannot have technological progress without employing their poor people who are poorly educated. They have to develop their poor people. Why do they have to develop poor people? Because that's what the British gave them with British policy. We should look at our own mess and get a clearer and more honest view of the matter. What's happening to the United States? We're all Chinese. Except the Chinese are producing and we're not. Now we have two areas of the world strategically. One is the transatlantic world, and we divide the transatlantic into two parts, North Atlantic and South Atlantic. We also have the Pacific part of the world. The Pacific part of the world is doing the right thing. Vast investment in nuclear power, mass transportation, and promotion of technology. Europe, an absolute stinking mess. British influence is stronger there. They had to crush us to get it out of us. Europe was an easier target. So now, but what's the point? What's the market? What's the world market for Chinese production? Who's destroying that? Is it China? Oh, the fault lies in our own government. I could fix this problem. Get rid of this president. And I think we're about to have a very big improvement in the composition of our Congress, I believe, especially the House of Representatives. I understand 100% of them are about up for election. Boy, what a fine opportunity for a house cleaning. All right, so our problem is you've got to look at these things from globally. What's the issue? Don't think of nations as entities in competition or with conflict with each other. They're not inherently in conflict with one another. What are they? They represent language cultures. And it's not just language as a determination, it's language cultures. And it's not just the same language necessarily, it's the culture as such. So you have, what do you form a nation on the basis of? Some kind of a contract? You go out and set up a bunch of people, slaves, build a stockade, put them in the stockade, call it a government, call it an economy? Or do you realize that they have a culture? Do you realize, again, this is the same thing we came up with just the previous question. The question, what's the question of culture? The question of culture is not one which you can define in terms of simple mechanical views of sense perception. Culture is the ancestors inside you. It's the ancestors in your language and its evolution. It's the creative powers of reason in your population which are expressed with the art, the artistic culture especially, and the form of language of the population. This enables the population to work together on the basis of the creative powers of the individual, as opposed to the so-called mechanically taught principles. You have to get to the soul of the population. And you have to bring that soul up to a better degree of self-education. Now you have a population, a nation. Oh, that's something real, something precious. Now you engage that nation with other nations in a common purpose. It's like different people being brought together for a common end. And you have to think, now, but what determines the success of this proposition? The cooperation, the relationship among these people. Now, what's the relationship of China to the rest of the world? Well, China went ahead on the basis of saying, well, the United States is there. We have a relationship to Europe. If they don't collapse, we got the right program. What went wrong? Europe went wrong, and the United States went wrong. That's what went wrong. So you got to change the United States, not China. China will change itself, but give it what it can adapt to for change. You see, we have a system out there. I look at it from a standpoint of being an old man and looking ahead for about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, being an old man, expecting to be stubborn, to hold on and do all these things that I have to do. My view is, okay, what do we do? We've got two parts of the world. One part of the world is transatlantic, and that's where the disease is. So don't change the subject. That's the disease. Doctor, that's the one that needs the surgery immediately. And we got the other side. Well, they've got lots of problems, but they're not dying. They're only dying as a result of the effects of our disease, which lies in the transatlantic area. The danger to the world is the collapse of the transatlantic economy and culture. We no longer perform, and our partners are suffering as a result of that. We don't allow China to have access to certain technologies. Don't complain about Chinese technology. Stop depriving them of access to things they have perfect right to. You have to have cooperation among China, Japan, Korea, and Russia, and other countries in that region. That's the immediate area of cooperation. You have to think about the Pacific cooperation across the Pacific area. You have to think about India, and you have to think about a certain part of Africa, which is in the same area. You've got to think about the mineral resources in Australia, especially, nuclear and related resources for thorium reaction, for uranium, for power. So if we were mobilizing as a bunch of partners, nations and regions of the world as partners, and we wanted to get the job done, we get the job done. The danger to China today is the collapse of the United States. And the danger to China is the influence of Britain and a sick Europe on the United States, which causes the United States to behave stupidly. And we have an ass licker of the Queen as President of the United States, and that is not doing us any good. So the point, we should not blame China for the fact that it's taking a policy which is based on the assumption that the transatlantic region was going to function. The transatlantic region is no longer functioning. The implicit contract of China with the transatlantic region has been betrayed. China is suffering a problem as a result of that. Fix the problem. Change the policy. Change the president. Come on, hey, that diaper stinks. Change the president.